I've purchased LUTs, power grades, and courses all in an effort to make my videos look like movies. But it wasn't until recently that I realized there was one thing holding me back from achieving that look. And in today's video, I'm going to explain what that is and a few of the ways that you can achieve it when you're color grading your footage. So that thing holding me back was contrast. Looking back on all my footage, I realized that it just didn't have the same pop and depth that a lot of the movies I love have. And so here are a few of the ways that I helped fix that. So linear contrast is what it sounds like. You're changing the contrast linearly, like a straight line. Whereas typically we're told to add S-curve to our contrast. And the reason I like adding contrast this way is because different shots will require different amounts of contrast, just depending on what the lighting was or how you exposed. And if we're adding S-curves to different shots, it's very easy to add different S-curves to each shot. And the way that the highlights fall into the midtones and into the shadows, it will change from shot to shot. And an inconsistent color grade is going to come off as amateur, even if some of those shots look amazing. And so linear contrast, because it's only changing things in a straight line, you're not actually impacting the shape of the final S-curve because it's the color space transform handling it for you. So you can add a ton of linear contrast, or maybe you only need a little bit, and the S-curve, the final shape of the contrast of your image, will be the same from shot to shot, and you'll have a much easier time getting a consistent color grade across your entire project. The color space transform takes your footage from your camera's color space and contrast curve to the color space and contrast curve of the medium that you'll be posting on. And if you add contrast after that node, it can be easy to bring your blacks below 0% or your whites above 100% and start to lose information. So because of that, it causes us to be a little bit more conservative when we're adding contrast. And when we're conservative, we often don't have the confidence to add as much as we really need to our image, and our image starts to feel flat and washed out. The third is to remove saturation when adding contrast. Now, I don't always need to do this because maybe I needed to add saturation anyways, but adding contrast will add saturation to your image, and you can see that happening here in the vector scope. And sometimes the image needs more contrast, but because the saturation reaches a point where we don't want to push it any farther, we stop adding contrast. But when we let saturation be the limiting factor for setting our contrast, more times than not, we're not going to set the proper amount of contrast, especially if you're someone like me who loves a dark, moody image, because we don't want a whole lot of saturation. So immediately it becomes extremely difficult to add contrast, and that was one of the biggest things that held me back. It definitely helps to haul up the vector scope and to watch the saturation change as you add contrast. You can press Command D to turn on and off the node and see the changes that's made, and if you want, you can haul back saturation so much that adding contrast actually added 0 saturation. And then you can worry about saturation later on, further down the pipeline of your color grade. It's very easy to feel like we're maxed out at 100% or at 0%, but when we put the image in black and white, it's much easier to see how close we are to 0% and 100%. And because of that, it becomes much easier to set our image within a range that we're happy with. This next one has been a game changer for me. When you look at movies, it's very rare that the blacks go all the way to 0%. But when the blacks don't go to 0%, it's very easy for them to have color. But the darkest parts of our image, whether they're all the way to 0% or whether they're lifted a little, they should be a neutral black, because that's the way it is in the real world. Once we reach a point where we actually can't see anything and it's just dark, there is no color there. It's just a neutral black. There's no information. If they start to have a color to them or saturation, what happens is the image starts to feel washed out. I'll use the log wheels as one of the last steps in my color grade to do a final cleanups of the black. And I'll bring up my waveform and I'll control the red, green, and blue channels until I neutralize those blacks. Now the log wheels normally have the shadows set as 0.33 or below, but I find that this impacts too much into the midtones, especially if you have a typical darker image in general. Up to 33% might actually be quite a lot of your image. I like to set it at roughly between 0.1 and 0.15 depending on the image, so that it's really only cleaning up just the last bit of the darkest parts of your image. Adding a Kodak 2383 LUT is such a hack to get that film look, because a lot of movies are printed on, or at least made to look like they're printed on, Kodak 2383. You transform whatever your output color space is, like Rec 709, Gamma 2.4, and then you export it to Cineon Film Log for the Gamma. Then the next node, you go into your LUTs, your film looks, you go to your Rec 709 and you have your 2383 options. The D55 is the warmest, and the D65 is the coolest, and the D60 is more neutral. And so depending on how you want your image to feel, you can choose which one works best for you. And typically what I'll do then is combine these two nodes as a compound node, and then use the key output gain and take it down to maybe even 20% or 15%, just so it's just a subtle difference, but it's enough that it really helps you start to get a look that isn't like a straight out of camera look. As simple as the ideas are in this video, they really made a huge difference to my color grades. So give them a shot and let me know if they make a difference for you.